For example, with our new Buy Canadian policy, when the federal government spends, we will select Canadian suppliers by default. The days of our military sending 70 cents of every dollar to the United States are over. We are going to build Canada strong with Canada Steel, Canadian aluminum, Canadian lumber, Canadian workers.
That is not a policy update. That is a hostile financial takeover. By publicly cutting off the flow of 70 cents from every military dollar to the United States, Mark Carney is dismantling American leverage over Canadian sovereignty. Donald Trump relies on the assumption that Canada is a captive customer of the American military-industrial complex. He uses that dependency to extract concessions. Carney just took that weapon away. This is the first stage of national resilience. It is a calculated strike against the very idea of American dominance. And that matters because you cannot be an equal partner when your neighbor views your survival as a profit margin. The numbers tell a definitive story. They show a system in retreat. When billions of dollars are deliberately drained from American defense contractors and injected straight into Canadian steel industries, the dynamic of power flips. For the factory worker in Ontario or the steel worker in Hamilton, this isn't just a political headline. It is the sound of their industry being prioritized over a volatile superpower. That is not just rhetoric. It is a hard signal to the global markets that the old North American hierarchy is dead. But to understand why this financial strike was executed now, you have to understand the deeper psychological break happening inside Ottawa. Listen closely to what he says next. It reveals the psychological core of the entire strategy.
The world's changing. Not gradually, but suddenly. Yes, some are still in denial. Rather than starting on this journey, they're waiting for the past to return. No. But hope is not a plan, and nostalgia is not a strategy. And if we stand still during this rupture, we will surrender our future to others.
That is the death of an era. By labeling the old relationship with Washington as mere nostalgia, Carney is structurally reprogramming the Canadian geopolitical DNA. He is telling the world that the special relationship is now a massive liability. Trump uses noise and unpredictability to fracture alliances and keep allies off balance. He expects governments to freeze in panic. Carney is closing those openings by refusing to play the old game. This is the core of his strategy for true resilience. It is a cold acknowledgement that the international order is in a state of rupture, and those who wait for Washington to become stable again are signing their own death warrants. This is code for total decoupling. But here is where the strategy becomes truly ruthless. By mocking the idea of returning to the past, he is disarming his domestic political opponents. Anyone who suggests appeasing Trump is instantly framed as dangerously out of touch. You do not survive a rupture by clinging to the system that is breaking apart. You survive by building a new one. Carney is forcing a hard psychological break, preparing the public for a future where Washington is treated as a strategic competitor. But once you kill the past, you must build a physical future that doesn't lead back to the Oval Office. The American weapon of choice has always been the border. If Trump shuts down trade, the Canadian economy historically bleeds. Pay attention to the exact numbers he drops here. They reveal the second layer of the Canadian defense.
And there's going to be a lot of trade going through those corridors because we have struck 20 new economic and security partnerships on 4 continents in just a year. Yeah. We are on track. We are on track to double our non-U.S. exports over the next decade. That is $300 billion. $300 billion in new orders for Canadian resources, Canadian goods, Canadian expertise.
That is the architecture of an economic fortress. Moving $300 billion in exports away from the United States is a structural realignment of the entire Canadian economy. Historically, Trump's tariffs worked because Canada had nowhere else to go. He created economic traps to force Ottawa into submission. Carney is systematically erasing those traps by wiring Canada directly to the powerhouse economies of Europe and the Indo-Pacific. This is resilience in its absolute purest form. And that distinction matters because trade is the ultimate geopolitical weapon. Washington uses market access to dictate foreign policy. By removing that access point, Canada is effectively blinding American negotiators. When you have 20 new security and trade partnerships on 4 continents, a midnight threat from Washington loses its power to paralyze the nation. Leverage. That is what this is about. You do not beat a transactional bully by begging for exemptions at the border. You beat him by proving his market is no longer essential to your daily survival. That is not just an export strategy. It is a sovereign economic shield. By diversifying trade at this aggressive scale, Carney is telling American corporations that they are losing preferential access to Canadian resources. For the Canadian business owner, this means absolute freedom from Washington's extortion. But no economic fortress is complete without the hard power to defend its walls. If Canada is no longer funding American defense and no longer relying on American markets, it must secure its own physical territory. Listen closely to his final warning. It exposes the ultimate geopolitical endgame.
To working with Nordic countries and the UK to protect our Arctic, we are defending Canada and Canadian values with reliable partners. It's a more dangerous and divided world. That's the reality. So we are no longer relying just on the strength of our values. We are also building the value of our strength.
That is the birth of a sovereign empire. Relying on the strength of our values was the language of a protected, dependent satellite state. Building the value of our strength is the language of a regional anchor. By forging a direct defense axis with the UK and Nordic nations to protect the Arctic, Canada is effectively cutting the United States out of its most critical northern security strategy. Trump views alliances as protection rackets, demanding payment for American presence. Carney is building a coalition of the willing that functions entirely outside of Washington's control. He is replacing American dominance with highly capable European partners to guarantee sovereign resilience. What makes this Arctic pivot so critical is the timing. As the ice melts and new shipping lanes open, the North is becoming the most contested real estate on Earth. Relying on Washington to protect it means paying whatever arbitrary price Trump demands. By bringing in the UK and Nordic partners, Canada creates an impenetrable wall of European deterrence. This is the final, undeniable stage of the decoupling. The illusion of a joint North American defense is being replaced by a hard-edged, independent Canadian capacity. The strategy is complete. Canada has stopped the financial bleeding, killed the psychological dependence, built a massive alternative economy, and armed its northern borders. If this trajectory holds, Canada will no longer brace for American impact. It will dictate its own terms to the world. This is not just a policy shift, it is a declaration of absolute sovereignty. Subscribe to Canada SR for for sharp, in-depth analysis on the global power shifts that are quietly reshaping Canada's future. Because moments like this aren't just headlines, they're turning points,